The next collection video will be for the Atari computers. I had an Atari 65XE around 86 or 87, and it was the first computer that actually I was able to save data with a storage device, and I was able to play games on. I hope you enjoy. First up are the Atari 8-bit computers. They were first released in 1979 with the Atari 400 computer and discontinued in 1992. This model, the one I have in my collection, is an Atari 800 XL. It came with 64K of RAM. The other computer I have in my collection is an Atari 130XE. It came with 128K of RAM. There's not a lot of difference between the two, that's why I've kind of lumped them together with the exception of how much memory they have. The Atari 8-bit computers had some great games, and I thought I'd show you a few of my favorite ones for the system. First up is Donkey Kong. It's probably one of my favorites. The colors are a little off, but it plays great, it looks great, it definitely sounds great, and the best thing about this version, it does include the Pi Factory, where that gets omitted in a lot of versions, so that's pretty cool. Next up is Bruce Lee. This is a platformer beat-em-up game where you take on the role of Bruce Lee. This is a game I actually beat when I was a teenager. It was a lot of fun. Basically, you collect these orbs and allows you to go to the next level. And here we have World Karate Championship. This game absolutely blew me away when it first came out. I'd never seen anything come close to the graphic quality and sound of a game such as this. You basically take on opponents and they get harder and harder as you go through, and there's 8 different scenes that you can play in, some in Australia, some China. It's actually a really cool game. This is the system that got me addicted to role-playing games, so I thought I'd show you a few of my favorites. First up is Wizard's Crown. It's probably my favorite of all series because this was the first role-playing game that I ever beat. It was released in 1985, and the plot is you are trying to recover a stolen crown from the evil wizard Tarmon, who stole it 500 years ago. The game had a great tactical combat system, but I didn't really use it a lot because some of the battles could take up to an hour just to complete. Supposedly the battle engine in Wizard's Crown greatly influenced the battle system from Pools of Radiance. Next up is the sequel to Wizard's Crown, Eternal Dagger. It was released in 1987. The story behind Eternal Dagger is demons are invading from another dimension, and the only thing that can seal the portal is of course the dagger. One of the biggest flaws in Wizard's Crown they fixed in Eternal Dagger. When you went inside a structure, you had to control all 8 characters, which made it very cumbersome. In Eternal Dagger, you just had to control 1. It's a shame they only made 2 games in this series, as I remember having quite a few all-nighters with friends playing these 2 games. Next up is Fantasy. It was also released from Strategic Simulations in 1985. The story is kinda light. Your band of 6 adventurers are roaming the countryside looking for a way to defeat the evil Black Knights and their leader Nicodemus. The game was very Tolkien-esque, as one of the mini-bosses was named J.R.R. Tolkien. Next up is the sequel to Fantasy, Fantasy II. It was released in 1986. The Fantasy series was a trilogy, but unfortunately only the first 2 games were released on the Atari 8-bit computers. Again, the story is kinda light in Fantasy II, but Nicodemus is back and has fashioned an orb which has enslaved the people, so it is your job to find and destroy this orb. Even though Wizard's Crown might be my favorite, this game influenced me much more, and that is Alternate Reality: The Dungeon. It was released in 1987. The Dungeon is actually the sequel to Alternate Reality: The City, but I actually never played it when I was a kid. I've put hundreds of hours into this game, but have never completed it as of yet. This game was way ahead of its time with its first-person scrolling graphics engine and its status system where you could be drunk, poisoned, diseased, and it kept track of how good or evil you are depending upon your actions. And this is one game that looked better on the Atari 8-bit system as opposed to the Commodore 64, in my opinion. Next up will be my Atari 16-bit collection. And finally we have the Atari ST line of computers. They were first introduced in 1985 and discontinued in 1993. This one is the Atari 1040 ST. It came with 1 meg of memory. On the side is a low-density 3.5-inch drive which you could play games or applications. And this is the Atari Mega ST4. It came with 4 megs of RAM. Both units came equipped with a Motorola 68000 CPU. similar to what was in the Amiga 500 running at 8 MHz. Graphically, the Atari ST line of computers were kind of at a disadvantage to the Amiga computers, as in their lowest resolution you could only get 16 colors as opposed to the Amiga 32 colors. That doesn't mean the Atari ST computers weren't a great gaming machine. There were quite a few games you couldn't play on an Amiga, but you could play on an Atari ST. I thought I'd show you a few. First up is an RPG series I really like. I showed it extensively on the Atari 8-bit computer collection. That is Fantasy. Why am I showing Fantasy 2? Because it was never released for Amiga, and the Atari ST is the only 16-bit computer where you can play the complete collection. Next up is International Karate, or World Karate Championship. I covered it extensively on the Atari 8-bit side, so I'm not going to go into much detail. Back in the day, you couldn't play this on a Commodore Amiga, but you could on an Atari ST. And next is Karateka, or Karateka, however you would like to pronounce it. Again, you could not play this back in the day on a Commodore Amiga, but you could on an Atari ST. One interesting note, down below in the description there is a video from Jordan Mechner on how to actually pronounce the game Karateka or Karateka. And here we have Ultima 2. I didn't really care for the tileset they used for the game, but again you could play this on an Atari ST but not a Commodore Amiga. You might think I'm putting down the Commodore Amiga, but I'm really not. It honestly was a better machine as far as graphics and sound, but I thought I'd give the Atari ST its props because it is still a nice little system. Now I thought I'd do a little rapid fire and show some of the games that Atari Corp either developed or published, and you could only play them on an Atari ST and not a Commodore Amiga. This is Gauntlet, and it was actually a pretty good arcade port for the system. And here we have Asteroid Deluxe, released in 1987 from Atari Corp. Next is Crystal Castles, released in 1986 from, again, Atari Corp. Robotron 2084 for the Atari ST. And here's a great version of Moon Patrol, released in 1987 for the Atari ST. And next is a decent version of Tempest. This one controls fairly well, but I was never really good at Tempest. And finally, a great version of Star Raiders, again for the Atari ST. And now the game many people consider an absolute gem for the Atari ST. And that's Sundog. This was only released on Apple II and Atari ST, and it was released on Atari ST in December of 1985. It was kind of a space trader combat sim / RPG. It was also made by the same people who made Dungeon Master, which was just a phenomenal game. And that's my Atari computer collection. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like and subscribe, as I'll have more collection videos coming very soon. Thank you.